What's going on, gardeners? It's Thursday, September 16th, and it is a warm and humid late summer day here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. Today, I'm going to share with you all my 4 secrets for growing young pawpaw trees so you set them up for success as they grow. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon storefront and spread shop in the video description for a list of the gardening products I use and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated. Last summer, on July 2nd, 2020, I planted 2 very young pawpaw trees. I made a detailed video all about pawpaw trees, how to plant them, and how and why you need to build sun protection around them when they're very young. I will link to that video above, and I encourage you all to watch it if you're new to pawpaws. However, if you don't have time to watch it, here's a quick recap. The pawpaw tree produces the largest edible fruit native to North America. It's in the same family as the custard-apple, cherimoya, sweetsop, and soursop. Those trees are all extremely tropical fruit trees. However, the pawpaw is hardy all the way down to zone 5 and will naturally grow from zones 5 to 8 all the way from the northern panhandle of Florida to the southern tip of Canada. For those of us that like tropical and custard-like fruits, the pawpaw allows us to grow a tropical style fruit that can thrive in places with sub-zero temperatures. While the pawpaw is nearly maintenance-free once established, it can be very difficult to keep alive as a young tree. This is largely because the pawpaw hasn't been well domesticated. Fruits like apples, oranges, peaches, and pears have been bred by humans for generations, and the fruits we eat today barely even resemble their wild ancestors. This isn't the case with the pawpaw. Pawpaw breeding is in its infancy, and even the named varieties sold as grafted trees are poorly domesticated and are basically just wild fruit trees that have known superior fruits. Now here is my secret. The secret to growing pawpaw trees is that because they're so poorly domesticated, you need to mimic their native habitat to get young trees to establish well and succeed. You should follow 4 rules when planting pawpaws. Rule number 1, buy small pawpaw trees. Don't be tempted to spend more money on larger trees, because the larger the trees, the worse they transplant. Big trees are more likely to suffer transplant shock and go into decline. Little trees transplant better, and that's largely because their taproot hasn't been wrapped up in a container yet. So save your money and go for the smallest trees you can find. The trees behind me, when I bought them last year, I purchased the smallest grafted trees I could get when I purchased mine. Rule number 2, you need 2 different genetically unique pawpaw trees for cross-pollination. Pawpaws are not self-fertile. If you want grafted trees, you must buy a minimum 2 named varieties, and if you want seed-grown pawpaws, all seed-grown pawpaws are genetically unique, so any 2 individual seedlings will do. While some have reported that the sunflower and prima varieties of pawpaws are self-fertile in some conditions, it's a big risk to plant just 1 tree. And that's because even grafted pawpaws take 4 to 5 years to fruit. So just imagine waiting 5 years only to find out that your conditions aren't right and your tree needs a pollinator. Then you'll have to go out and buy another tree and wait another 5 years for that one to flower and cross-pollinate. Just get 2 trees and avoid the risk. I have the prima variety planted behind me that's reported to be self-fertile, but I'm not risking it, and I purchased 2 trees. Rule number 3, pawpaws are naturally understory trees. They spend their early years growing underneath forest shade canopies until they finally become tall enough to break through and reach the sun. You should grow your seedlings underneath 30 or 40% shade cloth just like this, their first couple of seasons. I'll explain this in greater detail later. Do not be tempted to plant your pawpaw tree in shade to get around buying that shade cloth, because pawpaw trees need full sun to gather enough energy to fruit. If you plant your pawpaw trees in shade, while they will do well initially, you'll wind up with a mostly ornamental tree with poor fruiting performance. Plant them in full sun and simply protect them with shade cloth for best results. And rule number 4, plant your pawpaw trees in well-draining soil. Pawpaws do not like sitting with wet feet. They like an environment very similar to that of a forest floor because they're still a wild type fruit tree. So it is critical to grow them in well-draining soil, heavily amended with compost and mulch to simulate the breakdown of leaves and other organic matter that naturally occur in humus-rich forest floors. If you follow these rules, your pawpaws should establish. My final tip that I'm going to give you is that pawpaw trees naturally sprawl in their native environment. So if you want a pretty looking, straight, upright growing tree, you will want to support them when they're young and tie them to a stake and use that as some type of guide. The last thing I want to discuss is whether you should grow grafted or seed grown pawpaws. My opinion is to definitely go with grafted varieties. Since pawpaws are poorly domesticated, you run a high risk of having low quality fruit when you grow them from a seedling. That's because all seedlings are genetically random. Because they're random, your seedling very well could turn out to be the next hot new variety with the best known fruit quality ever. But more than likely it will have a high seed content and inferior flavor compared to named varieties. Also, seed-grown trees can take over a decade to fruit. If you buy a grafted named variety, you know you're getting a clone of a variety that's known to have superior flavor and lower seed weight than most typical wild seedlings, and they fruit in less than half the time. Most grafted varieties will fruit within 3 to 5 years, so you will have fruit much sooner. Now that I've given you my secrets, I want to show you what I'm going to do to my second year pawpaw trees right here to prepare them for the winter and a successful third season. Now, as I previously mentioned, young trees should be grown underneath shade cloth because these are naturally understory trees and they're very sensitive to full strength sunlight when they're young. So when I planted these trees last year, I had these all fully covered in shade cloth. So this shade cloth was all the way down like this. So when they went in ground from July 2nd all the way to spring of this year, they were fully covered in the shade cloth. Then in April, when they started to break bud, I decided that I was going to slowly let up on the shade cloth and bring it up just like this. So my goal was, when I bring the shade cloth like this, the sun rises over here in my yard, so they were able to get a little bit of weaker morning sunlight while still blocking the harsh UV rays of the afternoon sun when it would get high overhead. So that's what I did. So for the rest of this season until the winter, I'm going to grow it under the shade cloth partially lifted like that. Then next year, the third year, I'm going to expose them to full sun. I'm going to pull this shade cloth come in the winter when the UV intensity is very low, and then as the sun gets stronger throughout the year, the trees on their third season, now that they're much hardier, will slowly acclimate to the full sun of the summer. So year 3 is when they will fully lose this shade cloth. Now there's 2 things I need you to notice here. My pawpaw trees are not very large considering they've been in ground for over a year at this point. Maybe you've heard the old adage when growing fruit trees that the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, and the third year they leap. Well, that's because the very first year they tend to grow roots underground and do very little top growth above. Then the second year, they just start to creep upward and put on a little bit more top growth, but they're overwhelmingly still putting down roots underground, so you can't really see the visible growth. It's then the third year that the root system is large enough that they really feel comfortable to leap up into the sky. So since next year is year 3, I think my trees are really going to take off. However, I did an absolutely terrible job managing the trees. Because they're over here in the corner of my yard, I really haven't kept an eye on them, and they're just overwhelmed by weeds. And because there's so many weeds here, because the trees are so small, I probably was sucking a ton of energy out of the trees by allowing the weeds to grow so aggressively, and they'd probably be a few inches taller if I would have managed them better. So the first thing I need to do is I need to pull off I need to pull these cages off, and then I need to remove all of the weeds. So now the whole area has been weeded and is weed free. I also put in new bamboo stakes and tied my trees up. Here you can see the fresh ties, and everything is nice and straight as an arrow. Now that my trees are all tied up, I'm going to put some fresh compost down. I have some cow manure compost here, And I also have some natural hardwood mulch right there, because remember, we're trying to emulate the forest floor here. Now, it's too late in the season to fertilize, because the last thing I want to do is to give these trees some fertilizer that'll cause new flushes of green growth, because we're less than 60 days away from frost, and that is no good. Instead, I want to put down this cow manure compost, because it has plenty of nutrients that will slowly break down and feed the trees slowly over the winter, but they aren't powerful enough that it's going to cause flushes of growth. So giving them this nice new compost layer and a nice new mulch layer will both insulate the roots and give them the nutrients they need. Then when spring comes around next year, that's when we'll hit them with some fertilizer to try and help give new bud break and accelerate growth. And now that the compost is down, we are going to apply the hardwood mulch, a natural hardwood mulch layer all around the trees. And here are our very happy pawpaw trees. They have been mulched and they look great. They're weed free. I'll bring you in for a closer look. And just remember, when you place your mulch, never crowd it around the bottom of the tree, never crowd it around the trunk, because you do not want rotting mulch around the base of your tree, because that could actually rot your trunk itself. Remember to always keep the mulch around the roots. You're not trying to mulch the trunk, you're trying to mulch the roots. And the very last thing we need to do is just place the wood stake cages around the tree and then just put the shade cloth back. And that right there is how you care for a young pawpaw tree and get it ready for the winter, so they can spend their third season hopefully in the leaping phase, where they put on more growth than ever before. And let me tell you, you can tell the summer's coming to an end because it's not even 7:30 yet and it is almost dark out, so I need to wrap this video up. So as always, everyone, if you found this video helpful, please make sure to hit that like button and make sure to ring that notification bell so you can be notified for future videos like these. If you want to know about the products that I use in my garden in general, they are all linked down below in my Amazon storefront. Also, check out my spread shop in the video description for custom-made channel-related merchandise. Thank you all again so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video. One of my viewers asked me to teach Dale how to hold food on his nose, and that sniffer's really powerful, but we're working on it. This is the third training session. Dale, wait. Wait. Okay. Very good. Very good, Dale. He hasn't figured out how to flip it up and catch it yet, but he's doing great considering how powerful that nose is. Wait. Dale, wait. Hold on. Wait. Okay. Very good, buddy. That was very good. Really making good progress.